The moment when the delegation from the Islamic Emirates sat down with European officials in Brussels on that June afternoon, the heavens did not suggest a scene of open goodwill, but rather a complex maneuvering of practical necessities. The event chart reveals a sun in Cancer, the sign of home, roots, and belonging, placed tightly in the 11th house of associations and legislature. This precise positioning highlights the core of the matter, the question of who belongs where, and the legislative efforts to return people to their origin. That this sun is in a near-perfect trine to the true node within a mere tenth of a degree indicates a fated quality to the gathering. It suggests that, regardless of the ethical qualms involved, this meeting represents a necessary step in the unfolding timeline of European migration policy. It is an alignment that the current of destiny is pressing toward. Mercury, the messenger, is also in Cancer, but hidden in the 12th house of secrets and hidden enemies. This perfectly describes the closed-door nature of the talks. The diplomacy is happening out of public sight, perhaps obscured by the very real fog of war and the ideological chasms that separate the participants. The atmosphere is governed by Virgo rising, a sign of detail, service, and bureaucracy, reinforcing that this is a technical, logistical engagement concerning papers and human removal, rather than a grand peace treaty. The moon in Libra in the second house speaks to the weighing of values, specifically the economic and moral calculus the EU is performing regarding the price of hosting versus deporting, all wrapped in the language of balance and justice. However, the sky bears the heavy stamp of Saturn. Having just entered Aries in February of this year, Saturn sits in the 7th house of open enemies and partners. It is in a quincunx adjustment to the ascendant, signaling a strained, awkward relationship. The presence of Saturn in Aries, the sign of war and assertion, in the house of the other, implies that the partnership being forged here is one born of hardness and necessity. It is the iron hand of authority, Saturn, dealing with the raw assertion of power, Aries. Furthermore, the World Tension Index is rising toward dispersal, hovering at a high mark that suggests we are in a period of accelerating unstable energy. The static isolation of the past is breaking down, not into harmony, but into a flurry of frantic, perhaps desperate activity. What it touches. For the European Union, this moment strikes at its very soul. The transiting sun and the true node form a laser-like trine to the EU's natal Neptune. Neptune rules ideals, illusions, and the oceanic boundaries, both physical and metaphorical, that the Union seeks to maintain. The EU prides itself on being a beacon of human rights, a moral protector, yet Neptune also represents delusion. This transit suggests the Union is currently wrestling with a significant blind spot or a misalignment between its self-image, the sun, and the reality of its actions, Neptune. By engaging with the Taliban on deportations, the EU risks blurring its own moral lines, engaging in a dignified return narrative that belies the harsh reality of handing individuals back to a regime recognized by no one. The simultaneous conjunction of transiting Neptune to the EU's sun only deepens this identity crisis. There is a sense of sacrifice happening, a dissolving of boundaries that may leave the bloc questioning its own ethical compass. Turning to the enduring entity of Afghanistan, the land itself, read through the unsettled chart of the 1973 Republic. The pressures are visceral and transformative. The transiting sun forms a punishing square to Afghanistan's natal Pluto. Pluto is the planet of underground power, death, and upheaval. This square indicates a crisis of sovereignty and survival. For the Afghan people who have endured decades of regime change, this transit signals that they are once again pawns in a great power game, their fate being decided without their consent. The regime currently in power, the Taliban, is the vessel of this Plutonian pressure. We see the moon in the sky conjuncting Afghanistan's natal Uranus, a signature of sudden shocks and electric unrest within the populace. The closed-door nature of the EU talks, the 12th house Mercury, may trigger an explosive public reaction, Uranus within Afghanistan or among the diaspora. As the fear of abandonment crystallizes, the relationship between these two bodies is fraught with deception and ideological rigidity. The synastry between the charts reveals Afghanistan's Neptune exactly opposing the EU's Mars. Here is the core of the friction. The EU's martial enforcement-oriented energy, Mars, represented by its border guards and deportation machinery, meets the wall of the Taliban's ideological and religious intransigence, Neptune. It is a classic fog of war aspect. The Islamic Emirate may obfuscate, promise things they do not intend to deliver, or cloak their refusal in religious language, effectively blunting the EU's practical enforcement efforts. The EU is trying to act with the sword, Mars, but is fighting against the phantom, Neptune. How it rolls forward. The immediate aftermath of these talks coincides with a volatile lunar phase and a ramping up of the cyclic index toward its dispersal peak in the coming months. The energy is not static, it is moving rapidly away from the old status quo of non-engagement. As July turns to August, we approach a powerful total solar eclipse in Leo on August 12th. Eclipses are celestial cleavers. They cut away what is no longer viable. This eclipse in Leo, the sign of rulers, sovereigns, and the ego, suggests a dramatic revelation or a collapse of the dignified facade the EU is attempting to construct. A leadership crisis or a public scandal regarding the treatment of refugees is highly probable. Simultaneously, Pluto and Uranus are moving into a trine aspect in the sky by mid-July, an aspect that facilitates radical technological or structural changes behind the scenes. This may manifest as a rapid, perhaps secretive implementation of new deportation technologies or logistical frameworks that bypass traditional legal hurdles. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which occurred earlier in the year and whose influence still lingers, has created a reality where borders are simultaneously hardening, Saturn, and becoming morally indefensible, Neptune. In September, as the Sun enters Libra, the focus returns to justice and law, but with a sharper edge. The adjustment indicated by the Saturn-ascendant quincunx in the event chart will have to be resolved. The EU will likely find that the dignified returns promised by the Taliban are illusory. The fog will clear, revealing the stark brutality of the arrangement. For the vulnerable Afghans facing return, the astrological picture suggests an increase in danger and displacement. They are trapped between the Saturn and Aries enforcement of the West and the Plutonian oppression of their homeland. The tarot overlay speaks to this tension. The underlying cards for this period suggest the moon, illusion, fear, and the navigating of the subconscious dominating the early phase of the talks. This gives way to the imagery of judgment or the tower as the eclipses hit in August. Structures built on unstable ground, the diplomatic pact, are likely to be shaken, forcing a day of reckoning that cannot be avoided. Summary. This astrological moment marks a necessary but ethically perilous turning point where European realpolitik collides with the enduring suffering of the Afghan people. You should watch for a significant diplomatic breakdown or public scandal in mid-August, driven by the total solar eclipse in Leo, which threatens to expose the lack of genuine dignity in the deportation agreements. Monitor the stability of the EU's internal coalition, as the Neptune transit to the EU's sun suggests a growing identity crisis and moral fatigue among member states regarding migration policy. Expect sudden unrest or shifts in the Afghan public mood, indicated by the moon conjunct Afghanistan's natal Uranus, likely triggered by the news of these negotiations or the first wave of returns. Observe a hardening of the EU's enforcement tactics, as Saturn in Aries continues to transit the House of Partners, prioritizing force and border control over humanitarian compassion. And beware of logistical failures and obfuscation signaled by the Afghan Neptune opposing EU Mars, where the rigid enforcement of the EU meets the evasive ideological resistance of the Taliban. The heavens indicate that while the machinery of deportation is being set in motion with cold efficiency, the moral cost of this engagement will weigh heavily on the conscience of the West in the months to come. Recent history and where this is heading. This localized diplomatic tension resonates deeply with the broader, slow-moving climate of Saturn conjunct Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, a cycle that tends to dissolve abstract humanitarian ideals into the harder edges of structural enforcement. Both the European Union and the Islamic Emirate are navigating this transit's demand for pragmatism over principle, where the fog of political narratives gives way to the cold stone of necessity. As these heavy outer planet configurations persist, the symbolism suggests that the coming months will challenge the durability of these cold bargains. The total solar eclipse at 20 degrees Leo on August 12th looms as a volatile trigger, likely illuminating the cracks in these fragile agreements and exposing the unrest hidden beneath the diplomatic veneer. Ultimately, this event is not an isolated controversy, but a single thread in a larger tapestry of geopolitical realignment, illustrating how seemingly unrelated global stories are invariably bound together by the unseen currents of the sky. Before you go, these are heavy skies we observe, where the displacement of home and the fog of political necessity weigh heavily on the collective spirit. If you feel the pressure of these long-term shifts, specifically the tension building toward the eclipses and the hardening of borders later this year, an annual transit forecast can offer you a personal roadmap. It will illuminate how these broader restrictive movements interact with your own natal chart, helping you find your own ground of safety amidst the upheaval. When the news is filled with closed doors and obscured intentions, finding the truth can be a challenge for the soul. I suggest a tarot standard reading, specifically utilizing the blind spot spread to pierce through the confusion. This layout is designed to reveal exactly what is being hidden from you, whether by external forces or your own subconscious, and offers the clarity you need to navigate the moral complexities that lie ahead. Both of these offerings are available here at Occultic whenever you feel ready to look deeper.